Hi, everyone. Welcome to the APA Justice Task Force webinar, Mass Surveillance in the ICE Crackdown, what the Asian American and Pacific Islander community needs to know. Since 2015, APA Justice has been raising public attention and organizing opposition to biased national security and law enforcement programs that unfairly target people based on race, ethnicity, and national origin rather than individualized evidence of wrongdoing. Back in 2020, APA Justice produced a webinar series on the China Initiative, a Justice Department program that brought false allegations of espionage against several prominent Asian American scientists and technologists. That program officially ended in 2021. In 2024, APA Justice produced a webinar on Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows the National Security Agency to sweep up Americans' electronic communications with foreigners living abroad without warrants, and then allows the FBI to sift through this data, again without warrants, to find Americans' communications, which it can use to pursue counterterrorism and espionage investigations. The NSA started this controversial warrantless surveillance program in the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and in direct violation of the FISA law, which requires individualized orders. Once it was discovered, Congress authorized its continuance through Section 702 with some modifications, including sunset provisions after which the law would expire. The next sunset vote is scheduled for next month. Unfortunately, the 2024 vote not only allowed the law to continue for another 2 years, but it expanded the way the government can use the seized communications it obtains to vet non-U.S. citizens who want to travel to the United States. This shows how mass surveillance programs, justified as necessary counterterrorism measures, are easily expanded to serve new priorities like targeting immigrant communities. Today, we're seeing masked ICE agents engaging in abusive tactics against undocumented immigrants, as well as permanent residents, refugees, and asylum seekers, and even U.S. citizens. ICE and Border Patrol agents killed U.S. citizens in Minnesota, including Renee Good and Alex Preddy, for simply monitoring and documenting their activities. And in St. Paul, raided the home of Hmong American Chong Li Thao and dragged him out into the cold, handcuffed in his underwear. Many of us are concerned for friends in Minnesota and other cities that the Trump administration has targeted as part of its mass deportation program and seeking ways to help. We have an informative program for you tonight featuring an expert panel with Saira Hussain, Senior Staff Attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Temple University Professor Xiaoxing Shi, and Asian Americans Advancing Justice AAJC Executive Director John Yang. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A feature, and we'll get to them as we can. But keep in mind that the webinar is recorded and will be public, so please don't put any sensitive personal information. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce Major Kaohly, the first Asian American and first woman elected to serve as mayor in St. Paul, Minnesota. Mayor He was born in the mountains of Laos and came to the United States as a refugee at the age of 3. A strong work ethic, her family's tenacity, and support from her community propelled Mayor He to the highest levels of Minnesota State Legislature and now to City Hall. She serves at a time when the local Hmong community in St. Paul has been facing increased pressure from immigration enforcement agents, even before the more recent ICE crackdown began. Mayor He, welcome, and please give us an update on the situation you're facing in Minnesota, how it affects the AAPI community, and what St. Paul is doing in response.
Hi, Mike. Thank you for having me on, and I look forward to have the conversation today. I appreciate the opportunity to just talk a little bit about what's happened here. I'm sure you all are probably really aware of what's been happening, so I don't know how much background you're looking for. But, we are seeing a wind down, of the ICE activity, the heat that was on. I mean, I would say that literally every single day we were having crowds build up. We were having, communities targeted. We were having, incident after incident. And, we are seeing that with the removal of Bovino and Tom Homan sort of taking the helm, we are seeing that there is a little bit more reprieve from what we'd been experiencing. We do know that there are still operations that are happening. We are still getting reports from our community members that they're still having encounters. We are still seeing ICE vehicles in some of our neighborhoods. But I will say that, the heat of where we were at before has been brought down tremendously. I think that what is really important for us to maybe all know is that especially for the AAPI community. What we saw here happening in Minnesota was happening to our AAPI community long before everyone, the rest of the country and the world started seeing what was happening here. I might have shared it with this group. I can't remember if it was this group or another one, but in April of last year, I was a state legislator at that time, and I had convened a meeting with representatives from ICE who met with us and provided us with very little information. I mean, we were never told where they were going to be, what operations they were executing on. There was just very little communication between the federal government and our local electeds and law enforcement. And at that time, we were already hearing from our AAPI community that people had been detained. And there was very little visibility to what ICE was doing. And I think that it just wasn't on people's radars. But we knew in our communities, especially our Southeast Asian communities, that they were already being targeted. So I met with ICE at that time. And, really the conversation was around that they were targeting people with criminal records or they were a national security threat. And I remember distinctly asking them, like, are you through all of them? Because we're hearing now from our community that you're just targeting anybody now. And at that point, I had already heard from some of our community members that they had family members who are American citizens who were detained. So, like this thing that they were doing, it's not a new thing. They'd been doing it all along. And then I do remember that starting at the beginning of June, I started going on check-ins with our members with removal orders. And I was working with our organizations here who are on the ground, and we were just speculating at the time that like if more people would go with the individual to our Whipple building. I think as you all maybe heard a lot about the Whipple building, but we just knew that we suspected that if many of us went, that they were less likely to grab somebody while they were in their check-in. So I started going on the check-ins with we started going to check-ins really early on, and I remembered people saying that they were told before to come in and check in once a year. But as we started going with individuals, they were being told to come in every 6 months, and then they were being told, and then they were being told like different time frames of when they needed to come in, and probably around I would say August. By then, a number of people who I was scheduled to go on check-ins with called and said that they were no longer going to go in for check-ins because they were just going to hide their person for the next couple of years. We had already heard that too many people were getting taken, and that summer we had a number of weekends in which the AAPI community was targeted heavily. And so, like this targeting of our AAPI community started really early on, and I think that that's part of our hyper invisibility, right? Like when it happens to our community, no one is paying attention to it at all. And it wasn't until we started seeing, you know, uh, the targeting of other communities, like for us, when the Somali community and was being tied to the fraud issue and heavily targeting them, that's when we started seeing that, a lot of everyone coming together to address what was happening around us, which eventually led to the incident on Rose in November, which that was after I was elected, but before I took office. And it just culminated from there. And so from November through February was when just the intensity of what we were facing here in Minnesota. I mean, it was worse on the ground than it was actually what you all were seeing on the news. And so that was what was happening sort of during that time period. And I don't know how all of you are sort of moving within your states, but just know that, simultaneously we were working with our governor and our attorney general's office on increasing the number of clemency hearings and review of cases. We used to just have one clemency hearing a year, and we got that moved up to four a year, and we were hearing hundreds more. We were reviewing hundreds more cases. We were also working with different entities for providing support, and we were working with our Immigrant Defense Network and Monarca here to provide constitutional observer training. So I remember the first few I went to, we had maybe 30, 40 people. By the time I was, by January, we were having hundreds of people in rooms going through constitutional observer training. And so it's just we had to mobilize really fast here to make sure that we had the people on the ground monitoring and working to support each other. And that's how we sort of built that network of like Minnesotans just protesting and fighting together, was really through all of this Immigrant Defense Network and Monarca training for to be constitutional observers. So yeah, I'm not sure if that's exactly what you all were looking for, but now it's just for us, the aftermath is really rebuilding and supporting our communities. And I can go into some of that if you're all interested about some of the work that we were doing with our congressional members, our state legislature, and also our local, our local elected officials, along with the for-profit entities who are helping us provide funding to support businesses, and what our foundations and nonprofits are doing as well. But we can, I can share some of that if you're interested. I'd already said a lot, so I just want to make sure I leave some space for
Yeah.
any questions people might.
We're, excuse me, we're very interested. And particularly, I think people want to know what they can do to help. So
Mhm.
anything you can provide would be wonderful.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I say that the work that we did was sort of three-pronged, right? One, we had to take some legal action because we, joined some lawsuits with other, municipalities across the country. But we ourselves, Keith Ellison, myself, and Mayor Fry and Governor Walz were subpoenaed. We, um, we had our own lawsuit that we were fighting for an injunction, and we also, in addition to that, that particular aspect, the legal aspect, we were looking at how to empower our communities. And so we were providing support to our nonprofit networks so that they could, execute on the constitutional observer training. We were also doing the underground networks of using Signal in order for our communities to come together and we had this really sophisticated group of like just volunteers who came together, and any vehicle that was looked like it could be an ICE vehicle, they started tracking all of the license plates so that they knew which ones were ICE vehicles. And they had a huge database. And then how they did that was they followed vehicles out of the Whipple building to see what vehicles were leaving from there. And that way, then when we saw certain vehicles in community, they could call each other. They had a certain frequency that they were all talking to each other on, and they were texting each other so that they could monitor where these vehicles were, and they can proactively send out constitutional observers. We also then started working with our businesses to understand what was the impact to them, and many of our businesses saw a 60 to 70% decrease in their revenues. And so we did our best to one shift our government resources to support. But budgets are set when you're at a city level; they're set the year before, so it's not like you have millions of dollars sitting around waiting to be shifted. And so we really partnered with our foundations, our and our private entities, and they were able to put together a pool of $4 million that we distributed out to our local nonprofits, where we could actually have people apply to try to get some relief and some aid to that. And then we followed that up with making sure that our congressional members understood what we were experiencing in our state legislature. So we worked with our communities in quantifying the cost of what the ICE occupation has been, and not just necessarily the police cost. What was the cost to our school district in having to shut down and move people to remote moving children to remote learning? We tried to quantify, what it meant for our healthcare industry, and what happened with people not going to the doctors because they were afraid to leave their homes, and like what is the health impact of that and the cost to the healthcare system when people are waiting until they're really sick in order to go see a doctor because they're afraid to leave, right? So like we did our best to quantify that. We also are working with the University of San Diego, who was willing to do a survey for us and to try to figure out like what was the economic impact. And so that is yet to come. And then we also did our own sampling and working with our businesses to understand what the economic impact had been as well. And we needed all of that information so that we could go to the state legislature and ask for funding. And so right now, our state legislature is considering a $40 million relief in order to help with rent and for emergency rent support. And then also we are asking for a larger package to address the economic impact for the state. And all of those are bills that are at our legislature right now. So that's a lot, but I just leave it there. Maybe see if there's any questions that people might have for me.
I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but I have one. Uh,
Yeah.
what, how much did your background prepare you for this kind of crackdown?
I think that my background in economics and finance really sort of helped guide the conversations around what we needed to look at to address the impact. But my 7 years of the legislature also helped us really figure out like what are the different levers that we can pull, whether it's at the state or at the federal level, and then what were the things that we could do with our executive branch at the state here, with our governor, our AG, and that particular group in order for us to pull those levers. And so it was really helpful. I think that had I not had all of that background, it might have been more difficult for us to piecemeal everything together and have the right people at the table.
Excellent. What can people do immediately to try to help you and help the people of St. Paul?
Oh boy, we could use, we are still could use a lot of help. So we are trying to, so we are working with our foundations to have funding available to support our communities and our businesses here. And so after this call, what I can do is I can send the contacts of the foundations that we are working with, because if people want to help contribute financially. But we are also, I mean, the help that we could use is our businesses. Like what we started doing was a workaround where if you could buy a gift card so that that business could give it to somebody who was struggling so that they could purchase groceries, or, they could purchase the necessities. And so if people are interested in that, we can also connect that resources. But we have a line, I think it's 211 or 411. I'll confirm before I send it to you all, but where it lists all of the resources online that you could connect with and provide either financial support, or that you can join those networks to help figure out how you can support individuals or support specific businesses.
Great. Well, I know that you can't stay through the whole panel discussion. I'm sure you're very busy, but thanks so much for your service and for providing this information so that people can figure out how they can respond to these enormous events.
Absolutely. And I'll make sure that, so my staff, Mary Zhang, she's on the call right now. We'll make sure that we'll get out to all of you, sort of the number that you can reach out to. We listed all of the resources for support of all different kinds on there. And then we also have our Facebook page, our city page that listed all the resources that we could gather so that our residents could get access to that. So if any of you maybe want to either replicate that or connect with those organizations to help support them. And then, yeah, I think that was, those were the specific next steps. But
Great.
yes, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll be sending out information to all the people who have registered for this webinar, so that'll be very helpful. Thank you very much,
Thank
Mary.
you so much, everyone. Have a good night.
Okay. And now we move on to our panel discussion. I'd like to introduce them first. Saira Hussain, Senior Staff Attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. She litigates, excuse me, at the sorry about that. She litigates at the intersection of racial and immigrant justice, government surveillance and technology, with cases challenging border searches of electronic devices, police surveillance of protesters, and law enforcement sharing of license plate reader data with ICE. Previously, she served as staff attorney at the Asian Law Caucus, where she focused on separating federal immigration enforcement from local law enforcement through litigation, advocacy, and coalition building. She holds undergraduate and law degrees from UC Berkeley. Thanks for being with us, Saira. Next is Xiaoxing, Laura H. Carnell, Professor of Physics at Temple University. He's a leading expert in superconductor technologies. Professor Xi was arrested in May of 2015 by armed FBI agents in front of his family on false charges of sharing sensitive technology with China. The charges were dropped just 4 months later. His case, involving warrantless surveillance under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and Executive Order 12333, became a landmark in the fight against racial profiling of Chinese American scientists. He filed suit challenging the prosecution and discriminatory targeting, and in 2020 received the Andrei Sakharov Prize from the American Physical Society for his advocacy for open scientific exchange. And finally, John Yang, President and Executive Director of Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. John leads the organization's efforts to fight for the civil rights and empower Asian Americans to create a more just America for all through public policy, advocacy, education, and litigation. John's an experienced attorney with over 2 decades of policy, litigation, and corporate expertise. He graduated with honors from George Washington University Law School. So I'll start the discussion with Saira. What mass surveillance programs are currently available to the immigration agents involved in this mass deportation program, as well as its partner agents, not just ICE, but its partner agencies that are going out with ICE agents that they can exploit during this period? And what's EFF doing to press back against that?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on this panel. I'm humbled to be here. Um, I'm going to start broadly and sort of zoom into some of the more narrow programs. But, as you mentioned, Mike, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act is, one of the key ways in which the U.S. government can actually get access to electronic communications of U.S. persons. Um, the agencies are not supposed to actually be spying on US people, like they can actually be targets of it. But what happens is when they are directing their intelligence gathering efforts outside of the United States, inevitably people who from within the United States are speaking with their foreign family members, loved ones, associates, they are inevitably going to have their communications also swept up and available for the FBI to pilfer through. Um, the Once news about this program broke and Congress responded by putting guardrails or certain types of reforms, which highly insufficient, but there are some reforms around these efforts. That has basically made it so that every few years the law comes up for reauthorization over and over again, and there have been additional layers of reforms put on. Right now, what's happening is, as you mentioned, it's set to expire next month. And we're kind of in a bind because what happens is if it expires, then that means that all the reforms that are also around this expire as well, meaning that the US government is going to continue their surveillance without any sort of transparency or guardrails, which would be very bad. Right now, what's on the table is what's a clean extension of the bill for 18 months, but right now there aren't sufficient votes around it. There are a few bills that have been put forward, but don't actually have any movement on. So it's really we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. There's not much that we can do at this moment. What we are doing is pushing Congress to take a path, and if they decide one of these three bills, which again aren't perfect, but do put additional guardrails and do put in a warrant requirement. Some of them do put warrant requirements around the collection of this type of information when it comes to U.S. persons. Um, you know, to identify maybe a path forward so that we can start to move around it and start to provide our input on this. So we are very concerned about this looming deadline, and we're not sure what's going to happen with it. One of the things that we are doing is pushing very hard for the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. Which allows there's a data broker loophole which allows for governments in particular as well as other private actors to buy up information related to people's data. It's one of the ways in which the U.S. government would never really be able to get access to this information without a warrant normally, and this is the loophole to get around it. So the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act tries to shore up and close up that data broker loophole. So that's something that we're pushing for while we're also waiting to see what happens with Section 702. Another program that is actually new to the Trump administration is known as the Catch and Revoke program. And this is a partnership between the State Department and the Department of Homeland Security. And it's effectively a social media surveillance program of disfavored speech. And that's very broad. It can range from like people who are engaging in pro-Palestinian speech to speech that is quote unquote anti-American to whatever the flavor of the day is that the government doesn't like. And what the government is doing is using that to determine who gets a visa or who gets a renewal to a visa. It also feeds into whether somebody gets permanent residency or citizenship. It's a very large scale program, and we know about it because of comments that have been made by the government. There's some reporting around it, and EFF has filed a lawsuit along with the Yale Law School's Media and Freedom Information Clinic, as well as Muslim advocates, because we are very concerned about the implications this has for people's First Amendment rights and to be able to share their views on social media, as well as hear from others who engage on social media. We know that there are additional efforts to expand social media surveillance under this administration through, things like visa waiver programs, through the H-1B visa. And so we've been providing and writing comments in response to these additional surveillance efforts. And then, one of the big things that I really want to highlight here is like when we're talking about how ICE gets access to information, the breaking down of data silos within the federal government that DOJ in particular led is extremely problematic. What we're dealing with right now is things like the IRS sharing taxpayer information with ICE, ICE getting access to DMV data, ICE getting, access to utility records, which they did under the previous Trump administration, various types of financial surveillance, which has targeted Minneapolis and the St. Paul region in particular. And so when you break down these data silos and you provide this information, it means that ICE is able to build up profiles of people and identify targets for deportation, which is why it's all the more important that when we're using data for one purpose, that it doesn't bleed over into other purposes like immigration enforcement. Sorry, Mike, if you're talking, you're muted.
Thank you. And thank you for that. We can get a lot into some of the details, but I actually was testifying, and EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, was here supporting an audit recommendation in the California state legislature, because California, of course, is supposed to not, California law enforcement are supposed to not share information with ICE, but these law enforcement intelligence fusion centers where federal, state, and local law enforcement sit with other entities become kind of black holes where we're not sure what kind of information sharing is being done there, but there are at least some indications that that's another one of those conduits where information that's not supposed to go to immigration enforcement efforts are available. But one of the comments I often receive from people who find out about my advocacy against these mass surveillance programs is, if I'm not doing anything wrong, why do I care if the government is monitoring me? And that's why I'm so happy to have Professor Xiaoxing here, because I think he has the best answer to that, where he was obviously, well, I'll let you tell the story, Professor Xi.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank you for inviting me to be on this panel, and really very important and timely. And so why people should care? In my case, as you said, I was innocent. I am an American citizen. Still, I can get into trouble with the Justice Department. And as we've heard from Mayor He, what happened on the ground in Minnesota. And I think there are just ever more reason for people to be concerned about this, even if you have done nothing wrong, right? My own experience showed very clearly, even if you have done nothing wrong, you still can get into trouble. So I was an American citizen at the time for many years already, and of course, compared to what's happening in Minnesota, I sometimes felt that what I went through, what I suffered, was kind of cannot compare to what people on the ground are facing. But nevertheless, for me, I was a citizen, I was a scientist doing my work, and because the government and the university encouraged us to collaborate with scientists in China, so we did it. And then, all of a sudden, 2015 in May 21st, and about a dozen FBI agents just raided my house. They arrested me, rounded up my wife and daughters in gunpoint, and take me away in handcuffs. And for what? They charged me for wire fraud based on 4 emails that I sent from university email account to colleagues in China on the collaboration. They based on those emails and charged me for sharing U.S. company technology with China, with my collaborators, which was not true because all the 4 emails that I sent to my colleagues were not about this U.S. company technology at all. It has nothing to do with that technology. And so you can see that, you know, they don't understand the science that I'm doing. That's given, you know, that should be assumed. But they did not go consult with experts, and they just charged me and with crimes, and turned the life of myself and my family upside down. And we had to suffer all the pressure and all the you know, when you are charged by federal government for crimes. You know, I've seen many cases after my case, and then many people, they cannot think, they cannot eat, they cannot sleep. It's just a huge pressure. In my case, when I think about it, you know, the most powerful country in the world against me, right? When you look at the indictment, it says very clearly, the United States of America versus Xiaoxing. And it's such a pressure on you, and all for nothing, right? So I knew from the first moment that I was innocent, and they were wrong. But still, it doesn't guarantee that you will be exonerated. So I have to find lawyers, and we asked the expert in my field to write affidavits to show that all those emails, and actually all my emails with my Chinese collaborators, none of them talked about this U.S. company technology. And they're all about my own work, well published. And so, you know, they dropped their case in about 4 months after they arrested me. But that changed my life and you know, my life of my family forever, right? Even today, we are afraid that they are still listening to all my phone calls and look at all my emails because they know, they told us that FISA was used in my case, right? They had all my emails, and I can tell the FBI agents on my case. I'm sure he had read every one of my emails, and we knew for a fact that they bugged our phone and they listened to conversations between myself and my family, right? So this FISA Section 702, they allow them to have wireless, the warrantless surveillance of U.S. citizens with foreign people. Of course, I came from China, right? I became a naturalized citizen after I came here for some years. And so we have families, and then we have friends back in where we came from. And so we are disproportionately targeted just for this. And so what happened to me could happen to anybody who has done nothing wrong, right? When they put you under the microscope, look at everything you do in your life, and they could find things like of my email, which had nothing to do with the crime they made up. And so they can charge me, they can put me through all that. You look at what happens in Minnesota. This is a powerful tool that they can use on any American citizen who might be communicating with a person abroad. And then, you know, as you can see, anything is possible, right? They could do all these things and all these consequences. So there are so many reasons that we need to be worried about this reauthorization of this Section 702.
Yes, thank you very much. And you know, I'm sorry for what you and your family were put through. You know, and John, we worked together in trying to push back against the China initiative, and the AAPI community has been steadfast in demanding civil rights protections, not just for their own community, but for other communities as well. Can you talk a bit about about the history that drives this kind of commitment to civil rights, even during times of national security threats?
No, absolutely. And I think Professor Xiaoxing's story is exactly why we need to fight. And it really illustrates how something that might sound technical, especially when we say Section 702, FISA, these sort of like wonky terms, what it actually means in real life when someone is subjected to a warrantless search, and as a result, they get arrested on essentially bogus charges. I mean, that at the end of the day is what we're talking about. And I think what he is illustrating is precisely that issue. And let me magnify that as to why we should continue to care all the time. Is we suffer, we being the Asian American community, from what I always call the myth of being the myth of being the perpetual foreigner. No longer how long we have been in the country, we are perceived as foreigners. Now you couple that with this notion of so-called national security. And historically, that has always caused the Asian American community to be scapegoated. And you could look at whether it is World War II, where again, it was a war, we were fighting the Japanese Empire. But what happened was Americans of Japanese descent got incarcerated here in the United States. Fast forward by 50 years to 9/11, when we were attacked by Al-Qaeda. Again, I am not denying that, I am not minimizing that in any way. That is those two incidents are true national security incidents. But the result also was that we had the Patriot Act passed that resulted in the racial profiling of the Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian American community. And that is what we are seeing today. Chinese government, I am not in any way defending that government. It is an autocratic regime that is horrible on human rights. But at the same time, if what we are doing is implementing things such as the China Initiative, or suggesting that all Chinese students are spies, which is what Director Ray had at one point said, that results in the scapegoating of our broader Asian American community in a way that has these ripple effects that we're talking about. I appreciate how Mayor He talked about sort of the use of national security as a framing by ICE and DHS as to what is happening in Minnesota. Because again, we're seeing this play out in the same way, is that somehow there is this foreign threat, and that's all that the American government is trying to address. And that's where we all have to push back. And then the pushing back both includes that narrative, as well as pushing back includes the specific piece of legislation or policy that we're dealing with.
Thanks very much. And John, I know that you have to leave the webinar a little bit early, so I'll direct the next question to you as well. What are you currently hearing back from the AAPI community about their concerns with either the ICE crackdown or immigration issues, border issues, and what is AAJC able to do to address these concerns, or other Asian American groups?
Sure. I mean, I think what we're hearing from the community, and I think Mayor He talked a little bit about that as well, is certainly there's this concern that we have about being targeted. Right now, I think in a recent poll that I saw, about 56% of Asian Americans oppose the deportation of all undocumented immigrants. On one hand, certainly Asian Americans, politically, we can be very different. But one of the things we are seeing unity on is what ICE is doing, what CBP is doing is just objectionable. Another poll that I saw suggests that 2/3 of all Asian Americans oppose what the policies of CBP and ICE are currently. So that is the feeling in the community. Certainly, again, Mayor He illustrated some of this. We are seeing the impact on the Asian American community. A survey that was done by Stop AAPI Hate says that about half of Asian Americans surveyed have felt a direct impact, whether it's a loved one, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's a colleague, because of the immigration policies that are being implemented in this administration. Studies have shown that about 4 times the number of arrests of Asian Americans have occurred when compared between the current administration and the Biden administration. So those are all of the impacts that we're feeling in the community. And, I always hate, in some ways, I hate talking about statistics, because those statistics are just statistics. I mean, stories like Professor Xi, stories like the individual that was dragged out in the street in Minnesota. Behind each of these statistics are those individual instances that we also have to care about and lift up. And in terms of what we in the community can do, what AAJC is doing, I always think about it in terms of the model that our organization has that I think all of us follow in some ways is I think about how we advocate, how we educate, and how we empower. So an organization like ours, we sit in DC, so we can advocate on things such as Section 702. We're able to advocate successfully against the China initiative. When you're talking about anti-hate, you can advocate on the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. Get policies that help our community writ large. Get grants that would be given to our community writ large. So that's a piece of it. And Saira talked about as well. Advocacy can include litigation. I mean, our organizations can litigate and right those wrongs in many ways. Then we have to educate. It's both our own community as well as the community writ large about what is happening and dispel some of those myths. You know, when people talk about, well, we should just make sure that all criminals are deported. That might sound good as a soundbite, but let's unpack that. You know, someone that was convicted of drunk driving is technically a criminal. Are we suggesting that they should be deported? Someone that as a teenager was caught with drugs can be considered a criminal. Should they be deported? That's the level of unpacking we need to do when we're starting to tell these stories around what this means in this present moment, right? So that's when I say educate, because I think there is still a lot of mythology, a lot of misperceptions, a lot of misinformation about what is happening, what these enforcement actions are all about. And then the last thing I would say is to empower. And when I say empower is how do we help the local groups on the ground, whether by giving them money, giving them grants, whether it's giving them the tools. For example, one of the things we did in Texas was work with an organization called Asian Texans for Justice, so that when there was an alien land law that was being proposed in Texas, we worked with them to help, figure out the infrastructure for them so they could advocate against it. Ultimately, one was passed, but at least they delayed it for a while, and they were able to get at least some modest changes to make it a little bit more palatable. Still objectionable, but at least a little bit more palatable. And when I say empower, I'll be very direct about this. This means voting. And again, I'm certainly not going to tell you how to vote. I want all Asian Americans, all of our community to vote. But think about the issues that matter to you. Educate yourselves. We have a midterms coming up that will affect everyone. And so think about, if these are the issues that resonate, determine where the particular elected officials in your jurisdiction are coming out on this and make decisions based on that.
And the Section 702 legislation will expire on April 20th. Does your organization have concrete reforms that you'd seek, and what can community people do to make a difference?
Yeah, so yes, certainly, as Saira was talking about, getting rid of the backdoor searches and getting rid of the data broker loophole. Those are the two key pieces that we would like to fix in Section 702. And people should not underestimate a call to your member of Congress from your jurisdiction. I think sometimes people think, oh, what is one call worth? I mean, I can tell you directly, literally what they do in the congressional offices is when they get a call from a constituent, they have a little tally sheet and they will mark down how many calls they get on a particular issue and which side of the issue that that person comes down on. And that does make a difference into how they think about the issue, how much it resonates. And Section 702, I think, is a perfect example of that. It's like, I think there are members of Congress that don't get involved because it feels technical. They're not sure. They want to defer to so-called law enforcement. But if they start hearing enough from their constituents, they start reading enough articles, or this gets more press, they're like, oh, wait a second, let me understand this more. And at the end of the day, this is about privacy. This is about individual liberty. And those are issues that resonate, again, across the board. It's not a partisan issue in some ways. It's more of an American issue that we should think about. It's like, what is the privacy that we're due? What is the liberty that we are due? If we start talking about it that way, we can have an honest debate about it.
Great. Thank you very much, John. And actually, there's a question in the Q&A that's for you. So I'll ask one more before we let you go. What legal agencies or services, this is from Jenny Wang, what legal agencies or services do you have that could represent an American citizen in China?
An American citizen, I think it depends on what the issue is. I might suggest that person email. I'm certainly not, we don't want to put it in a chat because that might involve privileged information. Uh, because I'm not sure if this is a visa issue, if this is a citizen issue. It just depends, right? Because if it's an American citizen in China, frankly, the first thing I would think about is the embassy, our American embassy in China, and sort of see if that is an issue that can be resolved. But I would probably need more information to
Okay.
unpack that a little bit more.
Thanks very much, John. I appreciate your appearance here.
Absolutely. And I apologize that I do have to leave a little bit early.
No worries. Saira, what can people do to protect themselves or find resources to protect themselves from the kind of electronic surveillance, not just Section 702, but other, particularly when traveling?
Yeah, so this is actually an issue that is very close to what EFF does. Back in 2017, we filed a lawsuit against Customs and Border Protection and Immigration and Customs Enforcement, so CBP and ICE, because of the government's policy around phone and electronic device searches when people are at the US border. So these are border searches of devices usually happens somebody's overseas and coming back into the United States. And what the government claims is that their interest in protecting the security of the US, and in particular about making sure that unauthorized people and goods are not entering the US, is at its highest at the border. And thus they claim that they don't need a warrant or even any sort of suspicion in order to search your electronic devices at the border. So we sued on behalf of 11 US people, US persons. 10 of them were US citizens, one was a permanent resident. And we sued around this warrantless, suspicionless search policy. And unfortunately, we got a very good ruling in the district court, not so great ruling in the appellate court, and it's still an issue that needs to be decided before the Supreme Court. We think that another case is probably going to bring that forward, but right now, the status quo is that depending on where you fly into the US, the policies could be different because, for example, in the Ninth Circuit, there is a rule around which parts of the phone you're allowed to search. Whereas in other parts of the country, it's, you can search any part of the phone. There are also laws around like whether you can search a phone, just thumbing through it versus maybe a higher level of suspicion that's needed in order to plug in external equipment and image the phone, for example. So because of that, this is still a very open and evolving question. And what we recommend is, what's known as what we call surveillance self-defense, which is you can go to ssd.eff.org, and there are certain playlists there about, you're somebody who is in maybe a certain type of situation, and you want to figure out how do I protect my digital data from being compromised? How do I prevent that from getting into the hands of the government, for example? So we have guides for people who are attending a protest, for example, people who are traveling abroad. What we really recommend is, taking some basic steps towards making sure that, your device is secure. Things like when you're at the airport, maybe turning off the biometric lock on your phone so that, a person, a border agent can't just like hold it up to your face and unlock the contents of your device. Making sure you have strong passcodes, making sure that you're thinking about the data that you're carrying with you. I know that that's especially concerning right now, given that we've heard these anecdotes about the Trump administration and about the ways in which they're trying to, look through people's devices and identify people who they may not want to enter the country because of their views in particular. So that is something that is, very, very salient to us. The other thing that I'd recommend is, beyond surveillance self-defense and about like the ways in which you want to protect your digital data, learn from what others have gone through. I feel like, having Mayor on here is so pivotal because learning from what happened in Minneapolis and how people were able to protect themselves and their communities. The one thing that we always say at EFF is privacy is a team sport. So just because you're protecting your privacy, again, like with FISA, you could be protecting your emails and encrypting your emails, but that doesn't mean that the person on the other side who's outside of the United States has those protections, right? And so that's how you can find the government can find out about your communications. And so learn from Minneapolis, think about the ways in which people are in community with each other, protecting one another, and making sure that their neighbors are getting what they need, and also, protecting them from the long and overreaching arm of the government. That's very, very important.
That's great. And we have another question in the Q&A asking you to repeat the URL for the advice on electronic seizure.
Yes, so it's ssd.eff.org.
Okay,
Yes.
great. And obviously EFF has a tremendous amount of information on their website, both about what you're doing in court and advocating in the halls of Congress and state legislatures, but also just information that's helpful to people to understand these different programs. Professor Shi, can you talk a bit about the organizing that's been done? So you had two responses to what happened to you. One is like Saira said, litigating, and I understand you're involved in a lawsuit against the government with the American Civil Liberties Union representing you. So give us the status of that, but also your involvement with Asian American Scholars Forum and the organizing that they did during the height of the China initiative to try to make sure that you were pooling your resources.
Sure. Yes. In terms of my suit against the U.S. government, we filed a lawsuit, and then the district judge dismissed it, and then we appealed to the circuit courts, and we won our right to sue the U.S. government. So that case is in the discovery stage, and it's been a long time, and only recently there were some, my lawyers told me that the government has provided some discovery materials and they are studying it. So we'll be reviewing it at some point. So in terms of the AASF, Asian American Scholar Forum, it was founded when the MIT professor Gang Chen was falsely charged for his activities with China. And that case was dropped after several years. It was all false because what Professor Gang Chen was doing was on behalf of MIT. And he had done nothing that benefits himself, and it's all on behalf of the university. And so when he was charged, and several prominent Chinese academics formed this AASF to advocate for the Chinese academics in the United States against the China initiative, which was I think you mentioned it, or somebody mentioned that it was formed by the first Trump administration in 2018, and during the China initiative, there were many academics, the professors in the universities who were charged for activities in China, and most of them were charged for non-disclosure of their activities in China. But in fact, the rules for disclosure has never been clear. And so, they were basically charged, these people, for something that the people didn't know that they had to report. And so there were many of these cases that the government failed. One case, the Anming Hu at the University of Tennessee, the FBI agents just searched the web and found his pictures, the website in Chinese, so he translated it with Google Translate, and thought that Anming Hu was participant of the Thousand Talent program. And so when he confronted who learned that he was not a participant of that program, and then he asked who to spy for FBI, and who refused. And then he started use all these tools in his disposal, like surveillance and everything, and eventually charged him for not reporting his activities in China. And then the case eventually was overturned by the judge because, first of all, he made no money for himself. So a lot of charges are wire fraud. For fraud, the person has to be benefited from their, who made no money from this collaboration. And so there's no fraud. And for non-disclosure, and the judge was basically saying that the policy for disclosure was not clear at all. Actually, the university officials admit that. And basically, the judge in whose case, and also in Franklin House Schools from Kansas, basically the judges completely, how to say that, the theory that the government used for charging these people for non-disclosure was completely overturned by these judges. And there are many such cases in the China initiative. Of course, it was terminated in the Biden administration, but the pursuit, the enhanced scrutiny of these professors of Chinese descent has never stopped, and there have been continuing the cases that happened. And of course, we were charged, and who were charged, like Dang Chen, Franklin Tao, and so on. And that there were people who were investigated by the NIH. Many of them resigned. Many of them went back to China. And Professor Ying Wu from Northwestern University took her own life because of all this. So, this come back to the question that you asked earlier: why should people care about this? I mean, this is a serious. This is, when my case was dropped, I told the reporter that this is not a joke, right? It's not a game, right? They should not have done this. They should have have done their due diligence and figure out whether they really have evidence to charge us for the crime.
Right. And, I think, and particularly as a former FBI agent, I think there is a tendency to not think much about the impact of somebody, even when they're found to be completely innocent. That has lasting ramifications that, unfortunately, I know that you and your family have been struggling with. Saira, one of the questions in the chat has to do with whether you have the right at the border not to provide a password to one of the electronic devices. So obviously it's different whether you're a citizen or somebody visiting the United States, but if you could go over that and where they could find information about where they can, know your rights information.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great border search guide on our website. It's a one-pager, and actually, we suggest people print it out and maybe take it with them. We always say that people should develop a plan before they get to the border because you don't want to have these sorts of questions come up and you not know exactly how you're going to respond to them. So border agents can ask for your passcode. You can refuse to provide it. Again, like if you remove the biometric identifiers, it makes it that much harder for them to be able to get into the device itself. So if you say no and you're a US citizen, you still have to be let into the country. You have the right to enter the country. They can take your device and they can detain it for some period of time. It can be anywhere from weeks to months. I've had clients who, unfortunately have had their devices seized for about 11 months. And so that can be a factor in determining whether you're going to comply or not. If you're a visa holder, they can decide to revoke your visa based on your response. And so what we've, the advice that we give people is think very carefully about what exactly you want to do. For some people, that may mean, if they feel like I'm visiting the United States, I want to be able to enter. I know that they may ask for my device. They may provide it for the border agent and may just minimize the amount of data that they actually carry with them on the device. Unfortunately, there's no perfect answers because that too can be seen as suspect sometimes by border agents and may be a factor in determining whether they want to admit you or not, if you're a non-US citizen. Um, I should clarify also that permanent residents are also supposed to be able to come back to the United States. Sometimes what they may do is look more closely at your background in terms of like, were you out of the country for more than 180 days? Do you potentially have a, old criminal conviction in your background? And those could be some factors that may also complicate things. So, if there's any doubt and you're somebody who's traveling, if you're not a non-US citizen, you probably want to consult with an immigration attorney before you decide kind of which course of action to take.
Right. And there's one more question. When somebody communicates with their state senators and representatives about their opinions on particular pieces of legislations, is it bad practice to provide mailing address and from perspectives of self-protection? And, I know that certainly your representative would want to know if you're an actual constituent or somebody else, but what do you think of that?
I mean, uh, I think that generally that is fine, because you do want to show that you are a constituent. If you have any concerns, you may want to get a post office box and potentially direct mail toward there. A lot of offices just require like not your actual address, but your zip code and that sort of thing, and that may work. But as far as I know, I don't know how much information sharing there is between your representatives and the law enforcement agencies that are, kind of engaging in these surveillance programs. And because of data brokers and all that stuff, finding out where you may reside may just be easier than just trolling through like communications with a state senator, for example. So yeah, I mean, I do appreciate the close eye towards privacy and questions like that.
Right. And it's certainly, everything we do, we have to balance our privacy rights, but it's certainly important in a democracy to make your point of view known to your elected representatives. So
Absolutely.
certainly can be worth the risk. And Professor Shi, do you have any last comments? We're running out of time, but if you have anything that you think is important that we haven't been able to cover.
I think that we probably covered everything, but I just want to emphasize that it's important to get involved, participate in the, opposing for example, opposing the reauthorization of Section 702, and do things like this. And just tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody you know about the issues. Because, basically, we live in a democratic society. So if we don't speak up, then our interests are not necessarily protected.
Right. And when we talked earlier, I was struck by something you said about how it's important, even when it's a different community being targeted, because eventually it will come around to target all of us. So we have to stand up when anybody's rights are being violated.
That is correct. Yes, indeed.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Professor Shi and Saira. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. I'd like to thank our panelists and John Yang as well, and a special thanks to Mayor Kaohly. I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors of this webinar, which include Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and the Asian American Scholars Forum, as well as the Committee of 100. On behalf of the staff of the AP Justice Task Force, which includes Jeremy Wu, Vincent Wang, Madeline Gable, I'm Mike Sherman. Thanks for attending and good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.